Well, hey, everybody. I'm fairly excited to be here. I really am. Not least, I'm a little bit nervous, I have to say, because this actually is not the talk that I was planning to give. When I arrived yesterday, I was going to give this talk, but it turns out that's probably a really bad idea. I don't know. It's just like, well, Bootstrap's been getting some shade, right? I think that the reason that we use stuff like Bootstrap is exactly like what Jeffrey said when he was opening his talk. He said, wow, it seems like this web design thing is getting pretty complicated. And so naturally, we turn to tools and to other things that we can use to sort of paper over all those problems so we can not deal with what, in some cases, for some of us, may just be sort of a technical headache. Let's do the creative work, right? So how can we do more creative work and get sort of the other stuff out of the way? I sort of think that's been a theme so far for the last couple of days, is how do we get back to the fundamentals to create the really new stuff? Because while it is a challenging time, I think it's a really exciting time. You know, all of us carry a supercomputer in our pockets and handbags now, right? That has access to the entirety of human knowledge, practically, it seems like. My studio, Big Medium, works on user experience consulting. So we design interfaces, the experience that people have with technology. I work a lot with Brad Frost and Dan Mall, who you've already heard from. And we've done a lot of stuff around mobile, around responsive websites. I've built a lot of apps for companies like eBay and so forth. But lately, those mobile experiences have started to move off the screen and into the world around us. So I've found that I've been working more with big brands to make clothing an interface, or jewelry, or medical devices, asthma inhalers. This new kind of interface to the same digital systems that I was designing for mobile apps or for responsive websites. Now they're speaking through these physical objects. So we're getting to this place where the world itself is becoming the interface, not just these glass slabs that we surround ourselves with. So what we're going to do today is look at what might we build using web services, using the stuff that we're always talking to through the screen, if we connect them to the physical environment. So we're going to go on a little journey to think a little bit about what some of these possibilities are, a quick trip into the future. And we're actually going to start here with the car. We talked a lot about these glass slabs. I'm sure that many of you have a touch screen in your car. For some reason, that means the future is when you put a touch screen in your car. Of course, that's very dangerous because touchscreens require your eyes to use them. There's no kind of tactile feedback like we have with knobs and everything. So what we really want to start to think about, right, is how can we create a hands-free interface? So let's demo how that might look if we put hands-free interfaces everywhere.
Call Gerardo.
Name unknown.
Call Gerardo.
Name unknown.
Call Gerardo.
Calling Gerardo.
Yeah.
Hey, Gerardo.
This is a project called Curious Rituals by Nicola Nova of the Near Future Laboratory. And it's this fun little film that speculates about what everyday life would be like if we actually got all these fancy interfaces around us.
Oh.
Call ended.
Like disconnecting the call with a gesture.
Call Gerardo.
Calling Gerardo.
Oh, man.
Hey, Gerardo.
This is kind of familiar, right? I mean, I think a lot of times, as much as all of us here are technologists and enthusiasts about this stuff, we often find ourselves trapped by these systems that we're part of designing, that we're sort of contorting ourselves or often our language to fit the way that the machine thinks and sees things. So we're forced to bend to the technology instead of the reverse. The technology kind of works well enough for us to use it, but we're constantly feeling the friction against it, of it sort of working against us in some ways. So as we try to make tech act more like us, the risk is that we just act more robotic, right? Again, I'm a big fan of technology that empowers us to do more and to be more human and to make human connection, right? But I think if we build stuff out of kind of an unbridled enthusiasm for technology, it tends to isolate us, to actually separate us from people even in the same room or make us feel trapped. So as we start to explore some wacky stuff like this, there's really a lot at stake here. There's a lot that could go wrong. So, and I think it's important. This is a brand new model of computing that's just emerging, that's really exciting, but also really uncertain how it could turn out. And there are a lot of different paths that it could go. And I would say that designers, all of the folks who touch these technologies, who think about building things on top of these platforms or developing these emerging platforms that we'll be talking about here and that are ready to be developed on now, the way that we make these first steps are going to define how this goes. Because once this path is set, it's really difficult to change it. So the opportunity, though, is that it could make interactions more natural and more convenient. And again, have this opportunity to make technology bend to our lives instead of the reverse. Now, I just want to sort of pause to observe that that also describes the whole arc of the improvement of user interfaces over the last 60, 70, 80 years. You know, we went from these punch card interfaces where literally the language was the language of ones and zeros. We were literally speaking the computer's language there. We managed to get it a little bit better as we went to the teletype UI, the command line on paper, which of course actually moved into the command line on screen until we had this marvelous breakthrough in the 80s, the graphical user interface breakthrough, where we could create this illusion that we're pointing at pictures of information and clicking to act on it. And that was with us for about 30 years until finally this happened, right? And it happened so suddenly. Touchscreens suddenly became everywhere once that sort of got figured out, this illusion that we're actually touching the data itself, that we can touch data like a physical object. And throughout all these phases, what we're seeing is that the UI metaphor has more and more closely approached the way that we interact with the physical world. This illusion that we can touch a data object, again, as if it was a physical object. And as it happens, I know something about that. I actually wrote a book for a book apart. They've provided this really lovely, easy to remember discount code. I call it the Defutorzils 16Z. It's Designing for Touch Orlando 16Z as in, I don't know, Zeldman. All right. Anyway, rolls right off the tongue. Get you a discount off this thing. You can't afford not to buy this book, you guys. I'm telling you. All right. So the thing is about the power of touch interfaces is that it begins to introduce, again, this natural physicality to interaction design. You know, our minds have evolved for millions of years to navigate the physical world. Let's embrace that instead of this temporary, arbitrary world of graphic user interfaces that we've done for the last 30 years. That's the opportunity of moving interactions off the screen. You know, because if we can sort of stop thinking about how to speak in the computer's language, we can make things happen more naturally, right? I mean, our job as interaction designers is to translate intent into action, to collapse the time that it takes between when the user decides they want something to happen and when that actually comes to fruition. Dan mentioned this in his talk yesterday when he was talking about Jared Spool's line, that design is the rendering of intent. And so as we start to make these things more comprehensible and work the way that we think as human beings and communicate as human beings, if it goes right, and again, it doesn't always, Gerardo, we can, you know, make our job more successful, moving intent into action as quickly as possible. So this is the direction we're moving, in other words, going from digital to physical, or perhaps digital to more human. We've already been making our digital interfaces more physical already, you know, etching them onto these glass slabs that we carry out into the world and even use them to interact with and listen in on the world, pay attention to what's going on. But phones have also begun to make the digital world, the physical world, digital, because they're so packed with sensors, they can interact with the world around us. The phone is stitching digital and physical together. In fact, I would say that the smartphone is the first huge Internet of Things device. I know what you're saying. You're thinking, I've heard about the Internet of Things, and that's, I'm pretty sure, like singing toilets and bracelets that will text you if you have a body odor problem or something. Important stuff, I know, but actually what I'm talking about with this kind of thing is just this really sort of simple combination of sensors, smarts, processors, and connectivity, connection to the network. And a lot of things can happen when you suddenly put these things all together. The phone was the very first everyday device that suddenly got all three at mass and started to introduce this idea of interaction off of the screen. Remember the first time you saw somebody use Shazam? Right? The thing was just like aware of what was going on, and it was no longer a fancy computer in your pocket. It was like a friend who knew everything about music. Right, so the smartphone is, again, this device that made sensor-based computing an everyday phenomenon, interaction with the world around us. And it enables so many physical interactions, if you think about it, right? It's got audio for speech recognition or song recognition, as I was just talking about, fingerprint recognition, GPS location, motion, proximity, facial recognition, a barometer. It's full of these sensors that can make sense of the world around you. And if you put a sensor in something else, your phone can start to talk to it or control it even. So we're starting to see these traditionally dumb objects coming to life, things like light bulbs and door locks and garage door openers, because of the proximity of our phones. So everything can be a client or a sensor or a controller now. I don't know, maybe even a diaper. Oh yeah. So this is the nappy notifier from Huggies. So you insert this little sensor into the diaper and it detects wetness. And since it knows what your diaper stock is, it can also order for you to keep you knee-deep in diapers. Diaper-based interfaces, you guys. Forget this whole web thing. What we've lined up for you tomorrow all day, diaper interfaces. That would be ridiculous. But the point is that the fact that you can do something with something so literally disposable means that you could do it with anything. Right? Here's this little sort of simple sensor input talking to a web service. You could do it with a diaper. What else could you do it with? Right? Turns out in this case, this is probably a sort of frivolous example, right? I mean, the baby's lungs are probably going to let you know before your app does that there's some wetness involved here. But so, we'll look at some more serious examples in a moment. I do want to mention, though, this sort of stuff, when you look at it as apps, it doesn't all have to be about app-focused plays, friends. It doesn't all have to be about the app. It turns out that the web has some pretty good sensor savvy, too. So this isn't just the domain of apps. There are so many JavaScript APIs that let you understand all kinds of things about the world around you. These are often unevenly supported, but interestingly, it's the mobile devices that often have the broadest support for some of the most interesting APIs. So, just a small collection of things that you can see and find out about when you go to the W3C's website to look at all the different JavaScript standards and APIs that are available. That you can suddenly, make your phone, understand speech, make and hear sound, video conference, accelerometer, ambient light, all these sort of things that it can just be aware of through your browser. And that, do this today, you guys. I think a lot of the talks have been sort of, well, what new can we create? Has it all been figured out? There's so much untapped stuff still to be done with the browser, to be even attempted with the browser. That's just low-hanging fruit. And so do this today. Go and check out to see what's available. I mean, I loved Sarah's sort of provocative start to her talk when she was saying, what can we do now that's never been done before? Friends, a lot. Because we're not talking about just the visual spectrum. And even there, as we've heard, there's so much to be done. I mean, we've still got exploding polygon action to figure out, you guys. I mean, there's tons of magic that Chris showed in his talk. He might be made of polygons. Pretty sure. Too good to be true, that guy. So those are, but you look at things like these sort of high-tech things that we can do with SVG now. We look at all these sensor-based things. This is sort of the material, the working material that we've got to create some genuinely new kinds of experiences. So what do we do with them? And to what end? When my design studio continues to do mobile and web work, that's still pretty much sort of the bread and butter. I've started to help companies like appliance makers and healthcare manufacturers and clothing designers, fashion designers, retailers understand how to create meaningful digital experiences in the physical world. And that's sort of the tricky part. It's sort of bending around what is not just a novelty, but what's meaningful. We're talking with a well-known fashion designer and trying to help him figure out how to essentially make a magic jacket. What if the clothing that you wear is suddenly digitally enabled? And let's not make it a fitness tracker, right? It's like, what does it mean if you've got sort of this connected, somewhat intelligent, somewhat self-aware clothing? I mean, that's sort of like the stuff of myth and legend, right? So this is the kind of things that's sort of starting to explore. And I've found that there's sort of 4 ways that are sort of useful to think about it in terms of fairly easy ways to begin to get into these things. One is just simple sensor input to the web. We'll look at some examples of that. That diaper example was one, right? It's sort of like, wetness alert, what can we do about it? Notification from the web. How can the physical world light up in some interesting way based on input from web services? And this sort of intriguing idea, it sounds a little abstract, and I'll explain it a little bit more, of how can we make physical objects avatars of digital information. It's pretty intriguing. And then finally, physical interaction, not just physical interaction with devices, but sometimes between them. Sometimes giving the sense that the information is physical too. And I'll also sort of close with some thoughts about how and crucially why we might want to do this stuff. How's it going to be useful? How's that sound? How you guys doing? You look great. You look good. Really nice today. Yeah. I think you've lost some weight. All right, I'm sorry, yeah, okay. So the first thing, sensor input to web services. Essentially what this is simple input. So we're sort of replacing the keyboard and the mouse with something else, some sort of input to the services that we build and talk to every day. And again, much of this is happening thanks to our smartphones, often through some somewhat passive streams. Here's an example of a project I work on. It's now called Propeller Health. It was called Asmapolis, but they changed the name because Asmapolis. But you can see that they have this, it's a sensor that goes on an asthma inhaler. And the whole point of the thing is to help people with asthma understand how well their asthma is being controlled. Sort of human nature, we often think that we're doing better than we actually are. And so even just the simple fact of revealing how well your asthma is controlled or not is helpful. But what happens is that every time you have an attack and you take a puff, it registers the time and the location, which actually begins to give meaningful data about diagnosing the problem, because when the time of day that you have attacks tells you something as well as the place. And so then you get these daily and weekly reports about how well your asthma is controlled, but crucially what you can do about it. Right? So it's already actionable. But what's really interesting about this is that it goes beyond just helping the individual to being able to help the community. These are distributed through local clinics, and so we get sort of thousands of them in an area. So what they're beginning to be able to do is get epidemiological information about the sources of asthma in the community. Oh, an hour after people go through this area, we see an uptick of attacks. We've got to figure out what's going on here. So the point is that while the sort of first wave of connected devices and wearables tend to be very egocentric, sort of gadgets for the rich, novelties, what can we do with all of this information that doesn't just go into the bellies of big companies, but begins to help to change public health or culture or society in some meaningful way, or transform an industry, if that's what's important. But we can think bigger than sort of what's happening in these small ways. I want to point out, too, that what's interesting about this is this requires no new behavior. You put this thing on your asthma inhaler, but it's just the same thing is happening. It doesn't require any dramatic change in behavior. Keep doing what you're doing, and we will make your life better. Again, the technology bends to our life instead of the reverse. What that means, though, is that this is also fairly passive technology, right? It's just sort of listening in as you go through your life. There are ways to have things more active, and a very simple example of that is what Amazon's been doing with its Amazon Dash buttons. These things, you just sort of, you order them, you stick them to the place that's convenient. Here it's, you have a laundry detergent button. I've just added now a magic laundry detergent button to my washing machine that when I press it, places the order sort of at the moment that I'm thinking of it, and then the order is going to come, depending where you are, it could be within hours. And I think this is a pretty unusual thing, frankly, for washing machines.
Generally, you don't see that kind of behavior in a major appliance.
Thank you, Bill Murray. You're right. You don't. So they got these things going also with coffee machines. If you run out of coffee, you can order some really terrible coffee right away. This is probably not exactly the world that we want, right? Where we're sort of littering our living rooms with other people's brands. What I think is interesting about it, though, is what an interesting way that Amazon has figured out how to prototype this at very little cost, because the brands are underwriting the experiment to see if this is worth pursuing more, right? So this isn't the future right here. This is the prototype stage. How can we cheaply get an experiment out there and learn from it and figure out if it's a real thing? And so now they've started distributing these white label buttons so that you, as a designer or developer, can get one and hook it up to your own services. These things are called the Amazon Web Services IoT button, which is a pretty good name. And the idea is that makers can spin up their own, connect them to Amazon services to trigger all kinds of events. Push a button to trigger anything that's connected to the internet. In fact, there are a bunch of these things around. This is one called Button. It's a little Bluetooth button in this case that you can set to trigger any arbitrary digital API. It talks to a service called If This Then That, where you push a button and it triggers essentially a cascade of things for you. You know, the canonical Internet of Things example is you wake up and you push a button and it turns on the lights in your house and starts the coffee and plays the music. I don't know why, that's always the example that people somehow really want and crave. I think there's also kinds of things, though, in sort of other things of, you know, just sort of around the house buttons. What might you want to have happen? You know, so you could put a button by your door so that when your kid comes home, they press it and you automatically get a text that they're home. Just sort of different sorts of things that you can use to trigger. Again, this is done through If This Then That, this incredibly useful service for experimenting with these kinds of magical interfaces. It takes a ton of available APIs to services like Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or Slack. Or you can hook it up, well, it takes a little bit more doing, to your home's lights or stereo or security system, anything really. And you can then specify a trigger. You get a reply from Twitter or an email from your mom and then a series of actions. Flash my lights blue if I get a Twitter message, right? So these are these novelty experiments, but you get the idea that with any sort of input, this physical press of a button, you can trigger anything to happen in the digital sphere and often send it back into the physical, which we'll talk about in a minute. But check this out, these are really easy and accessible to use. If This Then That is almost like drag and drop recipes for this stuff. You just get this little physical gizmo, send If This Then That a trigger and send it to someplace else, very easy. Amazon Web Service is a little bit more complex, but you can wire it up to just about anything. It's not complicated. This is definitely within the realm of us sort of civilian web designers and developers. So that's talking about, the sort of simple inputs to these web services from the physical world. What about going back out, notification from web services? Well, that's what this product, Glowcaps, does. It's been around for a little while. What it does is it reminds you to take your medication. So if you're somebody who has trouble complying with your daily medication regime, it will remind you to take it. The little cap will light up if you haven't taken your medicine yet. And then after a little while, it'll sort of start to beep. I don't know, like somebody's watch in a room, for example. It could have been one of these, I don't know. And then if you still don't take your medication, it'll text you, right? And then if you still don't, it will call you on the phone. The robots will call you to remind you. And the good news about that, right, is that really it's proven that people who may be a little bit older and don't really remember to take their medication are great at handling text and voicemail. So I think that that's probably going to work out great. Oh, come on. Seriously, though, this thing has had really good effects. I think one thing that's really interesting is that it sort of quietly steps up what it needs to do. We'll talk about the importance of that a little bit. But it's not something that's always like yelling at you. It sort of gently reminds you until you need a little bit of a firmer kick to get your attention. But here's the point of this, is that this thing is the interface now, right? Or another way to put it, this is the app. This is the browser, right? If you think about it, we've sort of gone from apps, which are in a way very sort of custom-built browser, really application-specific browsers, talking to different web services. This is even sort of abstracts that even more, that now it's a device that receives these communiques from the web. So I think that it's an important shift in thinking about how we design web services. It's not all that different from thinking about moving from that it's not just the web equals the desktop, that now it encompasses these other devices. It's also not just the browser. Certainly HTML is the browser, but our web services are starting to talk to things well beyond the browser. So we're beginning to understand that web services might not need a screen at all. In fact, we're starting to see interfaces like this. This is the Ringly. It's this tiny little ring that vibrates when you get a notification. Designed for and by women, of course, and it's beautiful. My wife has one of these. She loves it. It ran out of battery at one point, and she kept wearing it. It's like this is something she wanted to wear, even if it wasn't magic. But what it does for her is that it just means that she can leave her bag or her phone in her bag and just sort of see if that notification is important. It buzzes, and then there's like a little light on the side that shows you what type of notification it is, who a text is coming from, right? So we're starting to get these very simple ambient interfaces for information that are also discrete. Here's another one. This is your new map interface, you guys. This Lishal shoe. It's actually an insole that goes into your shoe, although you can get these too. And you put into your app, where you want to go, or your directions. You put it in your pocket. You start walking down the street. You got to turn right. Your right shoe buzzes. Right? You just go, and you're just still going, and your left shoe goes, right? So that sounds a little silly. Except what it does is that it means that you can leave your phone in the pocket so you're not always being like, wait, which way am I going? And actually be in the place, be in the moment, right? But I think one of the things about these two examples that's also intriguing along those lines is that because it's not a fully immersive or fully attention-asking interface, it's really giving you a spidey sense, a sixth sense for information kind of flowing through you that you're not really thinking about too much, but that you're aware of. This little sort of tingle that lets you know what you ought to do. And I think an important piece of this is that we have this opportunity now to design calm technology to do this, things that aren't constantly beeping and buzzing and flashing on our screens and demanding our eyeballs. This is the suggestion of Mark Weiser and John Seely Brown back in 1996, 20 years ago, predicting the rise of ubiquitous computing. Wonderful book on the topic right now by Amber Case. Right now, our technology is very distracting. It's constantly vying for our attention. So as we bathe in more and more data, the real luxury is not additional data. It's actually the ability to enjoy some peace and calm. Services should alert us gently, even subconsciously, to changes in our environment. This is my friend and collaborator, Brendan Dawes. Brendan's a designer and an artist. Amazing. His work is in the Museum of Modern Art. These sort of interesting digital, physical experiments, although he also does sort of some proper design work. But MailChimp commissioned several hardware experiments from Brendan, and one of these is used to display the percentage of unread mail, a gentle ambient signal of how much work you have left, right? But it's the kind of thing that moves data gently into the background, rather than making it a constant nag of numbers and beeps and bloops. It's a sort of more this ebb and flow. Brendan calls it polite notifications. You can weave data into the fabric of your environment rather than imposing it and constantly asking for attention. So all these things, this is sort of going the other way, right? It's sort of, we were talking about pushing information up to the web, and this is pushing it back down, but also doing it in thoughtful ways that think about the context of where it's going, onto your body or into your living room, these places that are some of the most intimate spaces of our lives. And we need to be careful about what we're doing with them. So do this today. This is the same stuff. You can use the same things to get going with these services of like if this and that Amazon Web Services to push digital signals down into the physical environment. And really what we're talking about here is creating physical interfaces for digital APIs. So far, most of us have been attaching our digital APIs to screens. Right? But here's the new opportunity, is to attach those APIs to the whole world. Right? And I think an intriguing part of that then is bringing us to this third way of thinking about the physical interface, where we create these physical avatars, physical representations of digital information. We've kind of been doing this for the last 20 years on the web. We've been creating these digital avatars for physical objects. Google says that they've counted over 1 billion physical objects, cataloged them, figured out their relationships to each other, not just sort of a billion web pages, but a billion discrete objects with characteristics that they've sort of looped together. And so, if you start to go back here and start to think about, well, what are the URLs for some of these things? Well, a product page on a retail website represents an object, or a Foursquare page represents a place, or your Facebook page is your digital representation. But we've always accessed that information on a screen, divorced from the place or the person. And one promise, I think, of the Internet of Things is to make it easier to get that information directly from the object or the person or the place itself. I mean, think of all the data that's locked up or associated with physical objects. What if we could get that information directly from the object itself to marry the best of physical and digital? What does that look like? How do we achieve or discover that data? Well, it turns out this didn't work out so well, right? This kind of tipped over when we tried it. So we've looked to other ways to embed identifying information in objects. And here's a fun example. LifePrint is a printer that prints magic Harry Potter style photos. So you choose a video, you send it to the printer, and when you look at it through the magic lens of your phone, the video reveals itself. So essentially the photo contains a hidden marker that the phone's camera is able to read, translate it into an ID, display the corresponding video in sort of this fun augmented reality display. Of course, to make this work, you need this special app, and that's been the story so far. Strap a custom app onto objects to reveal their digital avatars. So it's sort of a separate app for every device, every sort of object, it seems like, right? And so, it begins to break down. Maybe my house has a Philips Hue light bulb and a LifeX light bulb, and maybe over in the bedroom I've got a Belkin Wemo light bulb. Kids' room might have a GE Link light bulb, all with their own apps, right? So wait a second, you're sort of like, am I in the Sylvania room? Like, which app do I use? Do I even have that app on my phone? I mean, the truth is, we have a hard time managing the apps that we already have. We don't use them. The average smartphone user accesses only about 25 apps per month and ignores the rest. Spends about 80% of that application time in 4 apps. Facebook. Right? Instead, we're in a situation where we're buried by our apps, where we're constantly, if the best among us may actually take some time to weed those out, but for the most part, it's just kind of like this pile, or probably just indifference to most of the stuff, right? And so it breaks down as a model for the different services in our life. And it's sort of a nightmare scenario that if every object and place in our life needs its own app, each with its own interface to learn, well, that's quite a hassle. So it's a good question. So what's the universal connector network? A simple connector language that lets us discover and introduce ourselves to objects and vice versa. Kind of like a world wide web of things. Well, how about the World Wide Web? That's the idea behind the physical web. This is a project that's an open standard. It's fronted by Google, but now it's actually part of the Bluetooth standard that basically takes beacons or phones or computers or anything with a Bluetooth signal that can just beam out a Bluetooth signal, can beam out a URL. And it's a way to attach a URL or any object or place or person. This is Scott Jensen. He runs the physical web project at Google. He's a friend. He's also a terrible actor.
What a great looking movie. When's the next showing? Can I see a preview?
No.
Nowadays, nearly everyone has the internet in their pocket and access to the world's information at their fingertips. However, getting and interacting with that information isn't always easy. So where did I put that barcode scanner? Do I even have a barcode scanner on here?
No.
However, if we believe in Moore's law at all, we can project that there are going to be millions of smart devices in our homes, in our work, and everywhere in between. Accessing functionality from these devices can be just like using the web. You just walk up, tap, and go. Cool, there's a show in just a few minutes. Check out this parking meter example. The user walks up to it and pulls out their phone to see a list of nearby devices. They tap on the parking meter and are taken to a web page. They just add the time they want and hit pay. All of the billing is taken care of in the cloud, and once that's done, it just authorizes the meter. I want to stress this just a bit. The physical web is only about getting the URL to the phone. Everything else after that is just using the web. In this example, all of the real work is done by using web sockets.
So in other words, basically you can attach a URL broadcast to any device or space, and essentially you can walk up to it and be like, give me your interface, and it takes you to the web app. Right? So that's the idea. It's essentially web search for the room you're in. You know, what's around me? What can I go to? You know, so for just a simple example, sort of building on that, parking example, is say you want to actually drive a car and not just park one. You go up to a zip car, and if it's got one of these URLs, you can actually go straight to its interface and check it out right there. You could go to a conference room and find out if those people in there are actually supposed to be in there when they're getting out, or what the schedule of this space is going to be. Earlier this year in Boston, you guys, I'm sorry, I forgot my physical web beacon. I had one problem about that. Is when I was in Boston for Event Apart, I set one of these up. And the way that it works is Chrome for iOS, for example, has a Today widget that shows you nearby beacons. So here I'd swipe down to my Today view, and you can see it says scanning for physical web objects. And it finds one, the room, and the event inside. You just tap it to open the link. It launches Chrome, and you see more about what's happening in that moment. That's Chrome and iOS. Chrome for Android recently set up a much more elegant integration, where if you're running Chrome on your Android phone, you get a silent notification to tell you about the URLs near you. If you see Jeremy Keith walk by you, he's got a beacon in his backpack, and you'll be able to sort of see that he's nearby and go to his website. So this is something that's actually getting built into the browsers that's there, and it's also something that you guys are super cheap and easy to work with. These things are really trivial to set up. They cost like $5-10 to get one of these beacons, or again, you can set up your phone or your laptop to do it, just to sort of test with that. What's possible when you can attach a URL to anything for just sort of instant discovery? I mean, we're already adding URLs to objects and people and places, as we talked about. Now, what if you can just sort of like now just kind of absorb it from the air? This is different from a QR code, because as you saw in that example, it's actually Google is sort of saying, hey, this is what this stuff is. It's not just sort of like you're surrounded by opaque QR codes. It's literally like, here are the search results for the room that you're in. It tells you, it advertises. Now, this is getting pretty cool because it's sort of like it requires very little interaction to get that, but what interaction there is still on the screen. Everything we've looked at right now is still mediated through screens. And don't screens already play too large and distracting a role in our lives? I mean, we've all been this dude, right? Oh yeah, no, I'm on this great whale watch. No, it's terrific. I really love being out here. This dude's missing the whale, right? We're missing things that are happening right in front of us. We don't even know it. We already walk around with screens in front of our faces all the time. And screens will always be with us, right? I mean, they've added so much to our lives. But perhaps we can change it so they caption our lives rather than frame them. Right? So I think that's one of the interesting sort of promises now of being able to think about physical interactions between devices or with devices that aren't mediated by screens. Let's sort of start to realize that phones and computers are themselves physical objects. Sure, we designed for this two-dimensional screen on this, but this is much more than an abstract two-dimensional screen. It's got weight and physicality, as does this laptop. How might we use sensors to create the illusion of direct control, not virtual or screen-based control of our devices? We don't really know yet. But we do have the opportunity to start doing some prototyping and experimentation, because the technology is here for us to play with, if not quite yet take to market in many cases. But I loved what Rachel was saying in the context of the grid stuff, is just, this is the time. The new technology is here. Go and make some experiments. See how this stuff works. And I will also say that the sillier, the better at this experiment stage. It's fun to make toys, essentially. And it also gets you sort of thinking differently from the usual ways that you think as a designer or developer. Here are new experiments that you can make or take on. This is my buddy Larry Legend. That's his name, Larry Legend. Isn't that awesome? Larry and I get together a lot of weekends and sort of hack together on some projects. And we were interested in thinking about how we could get our phones and our laptops, our desktop computers to talk together, to be happier together. And so we built a project, sort of spun up a server over a weekend or two and built this thing called Happy Together. Here's how it works. Larry's in the studio, listening to music on his headphones. he gets back to his desk and he wants to start listening to the same music at the same place. And this is how he moves it over to the desktop. Yes! Just 2 taps, just shakes that music right into his computer, and look at how happy Larry is. Pretty much my whole goal is to make this guy that happy. So a couple of things about this that's sort of interesting is one is it's just sort of saying this is super easy. I'm just gonna, the interaction is this. I want to get it from here to here. I should just be able to sort of shake that information out from one device to another. So it's recognizing that these are 2 physical objects. One is almost a container for another, perhaps. But it's also starting to treat the information itself kind of with metaphorical physicality. It's almost like the music is it's like salt in a pepper shaker. And so start to think that way as sort of physicals, you start to get these different interaction possibilities start to come to mind. We've got this thing working now, not just with music, but with photos and text and maps. Anything that's front and center on the phone, shake it into your desktop. It's super fun. You know, again, it's sort of this world of sort of seeing what might we do, how do these things connect? I worked with Samsung to figure out how we could use physical gesture. If you're one of the 3 people who have an Android Gear watch, you can make this work to sort of control your smartphone through gesture with your watch, including not just sort of waving your arm around, but snapping your fingers or flicking your finger like that. So you can sort of start, if you've got your music hooked up to your phone across the room, you can start and stop it like that or flick to the next song. But what's even more intriguing is there's sort of been this problem with these low-end, phone-driven virtual reality devices, which is that they're totally passive. You know, there's sort of these awkward ways to interact. And then at the Samsung keynote, they showed off this technology, this project, as a way to start to begin to have some control over what's happening in the virtual reality around you, just using your hand. So early days, a prototype, but just sort of starting to experiment, how can these things talk together in ways that are sort of more compelling or more interesting? I'm certainly not the only person who's thinking about this stuff. I'm going to introduce you to my friend Aral. He looks a little tired here. It's Aral Balkan. This was a couple years ago now. He was at this hackathon. This is at the end of it. So he's been hacking on stuff for over 24 hours. You guys know the drill. You bring some code and maybe some hardware and you work on it overnight, and if all goes well, you got something to show at the end of it. I will point out this like wine bottles here in the background. He's on a yacht off the French Riviera. It's called the Boat That Hacks, I think is the name of the hackathon. So I guess it's like, I don't know, the hackathon for the 1% or something like that, which he would hate if he knew I said that, so don't tell him. So anyway, he brought to this hack a Kinect, his laptop, a phone, and a projector, and this is the hack that Aral put together.
So you're sitting at home on your sofa, watching television, and something interesting comes on, and you want to share it, say tweet it. So I walk up to my TV, and I just kind of wave at it so it knows I'm there, and then when something interesting comes up, I can just grab it, and boom, put it over there. I grab, and boom, I put it over there.
Oh no, he
so
didn't.
I'm just holding it in my hand, and I'm putting it on my phone, and that's my hack.
Because I want to be clear, he did this overnight drinking wine on a boat. Right? Which, you know, I don't want to take anything away from Aral, a clever designer and a developer, but it must be easier than it looks, right? And in fact, you think about it, he taught the Kinect, simple gesture, take a screenshot, you walk around like you got it here in your fist, right? But now it's probably already on the phone, touch to release. 2 simplest interactions for these 2 devices, and yet when you combine them together, you get something that's sort of powerfully new and surprising. Right? And so the thing too about this I think is interesting is that these are just devices that most of us have at home. You know, maybe you've got an Xbox in your living room, and you've certainly got a laptop, you know, a phone, TV, or a projector. This is sort of standard kind of middle-class consumer technology now. We're surrounded by this stuff, this working material for brand new science to be done of interaction between devices and ways to talk to the web too. So what I want, just a sort of injunction to you guys, is do this today. Is think about what can I do with these devices that I haven't even touched yet. Go back to that JavaScript API list and think about, man, yeah, I should make some stuff with this. Because, you know, I think we tend to think about this sort of stuff, oh, in the future, when the sci-fi world comes and we're all wearing Brad's jumpsuits, we're going to be able to do all this cool stuff. You guys, it's already here. In fact, we're awash in the possible technologies that we haven't even started to use. It's not a challenge of technology. It's really a challenge of imagination. You know, it's on us to start to figure it out. We don't have to wait for anybody. And I loved the way that Jamie started her talk in a sort of a different context, just being like, this is up to me. I don't have to wait for somebody else to do stuff. I'm the common denominator in all these relationships or projects. I can make something happen. This is something that, you know, Val mentioned too in her talk. It's like, you just make the thing. A big part of this imagination too is about moving to these non-screen interactions, thinking in really different ways about these possibilities that are before us right now, waiting for us to just start using them. A big part of what you can do now is just go ahead and embed those interactions in the physical world itself. Because you think about it, it's like, this thing is still an awful lot easier than fumbling with your phone through several different apps to figure out how to turn your lights on. Right? What if we could wire up our own magic switches, though, our own magic knobs and dials, to edit reality so that they could do whatever we wanted them to do? Well, it turns out, you guys, we can. This is the reality editor developed at the MIT Media Lab. It lets you create and edit physical controls for devices like this lamp. So basic behavior, you hook up the switch to your phone, sort of basic, familiar remote control. But what if you have a dial over here? You use the editor to connect it to the lamp. Right? Now you can sort of turn the lamp, the dial, to run that dimmer switch. You guys, these are, by the way, are real examples. There's no special effects here. This is actually editing connections between devices with this augmented reality app on your phone. The car is actually a really sort of fertile place to experiment with this stuff because it's so full of controls and it's all digitally connected. But so what if, for example, you're somebody who really, you're constantly adjusting the bass of your stereo. You know how they bury it really deep into that horrible interface on your car? What if you could just say, all right, I want to take that bass control and I just want to remap it to this dial. It's like, great, done. You've got it done. Right. So again, these are just these real examples of essentially being able to remap physical controls, standard dials and switches and knobs, to have these sort of, to talk to the digital systems that they sit on top of. And I know you guys are thinking, I'm still trying to figure out Bootstrap. I don't know. Still trying to figure that thing out. I was talking about, I've got to get into these knobs and diapers. I don't know. Look, it turns out, you guys, that this is amazingly, this is the big takeaway I want to get. Playing with this stuff, it's ready now, and it doesn't take an MIT engineer to do it because they already did it for you. They've got this project called Open Hybrid, designed to be accessible to the interested web designer who maybe knows a little JavaScript, collaborate with a product designer who maybe knows a little way around Arduino. But it's sort of like, these are sort of, kind of the works of the trade at this point. And what you can actually start to do, and it comes with this reality app, this augmented reality app, that you can wire these things up, and you can even create the interface using JavaScript to sit on top of the interface to sort of do that stuff. But it's really about the connection between these things. And it turns out it's not that hard to do. It's fun to play with. What I think is interesting about this, too, is that it's shifting this idea. You're still using this augmented reality app, but it's to configure the physical world, and then you put it down, and then you're interacting with the objects to run your digital controls, just in the context of, again, your regular life. So we're able to have the same sort of control that I talked about earlier with this asthma controller, where I'm just using it like I normally would, but now it's magic, and now I can choose which devices in my life are magic. Yes, check it out. Do it today. It's ready for you. It's ready for the skills that you've got. So this looks like a really different form than what we're used to. I mean, this is sort of something that I think we've been challenged throughout the last couple of days already. We had Jen sort of telling us, we don't need all those rectangles. Let's be more creative with the form. What does it mean to sort of think about maybe the form looks more like this? These are the viewfinders that are at the top of the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, the tallest building in the world. Like a lot of tall buildings, it has these viewfinders, right? But at the Burj Khalifa, they've sort of said, what is the digital opportunity for this thing? What if we turned it into a magic viewfinder for looking at the surrounding view? So you can look at the current view. You can also sort of hit a button and see what that very same view looks like at night if it's during the day, or the reverse. If it's at night, see what it looks like during the day. Or you can also hit another switch and see what it looked like 40 years ago before the city was even there. It's a freaking time machine viewer, right? They've sort of said, well, we've got the data, we've got the information, we've got the view. Why not just hook it up and turn this thing into a magic lens? They've made a magic lens for seeing what's around you in new ways, hooked up that available digital data to this really traditional physical object. But again, what if there's no screen at all? I mean, that's sort of the intriguing thing that's been emerging and much discussed in the last year or so, is a lot of speech interfaces, is that sort of starting to get better. That's one of the most intriguing aspects of the Amazon Echo, how flexible its context is, because it's simply based on speech. And you guys, it's great for bringing families together. Let's look at this warm family interaction with Amazon Echo.
Alexa, play rock music.
Rock music.
Alexa, stop.
Wait, I want to try. Alexa, what time is it?
The time is 3:27.
You actually don't have to yell at it, okay? It uses far-field technology.
Let's just stop it right there. What's on her mind right now, right? He totally dad-splained her. Jerk dad. All right, so we'll sort of try to put him out of our minds for a second. And just sort of think about sort of what the idea of this is. The idea, again, is this idea of how do I short-circuit this space between intent and action? How do I move from that as quickly as possible? So that, for example, if you're running in the door with a really, really urgent question,
Alexa, how tall is Mount Everest?
Mount Everest's height is 29,029 feet.
what was he doing in the backyard? He was like, I got it, Alexa! Mount Everest now! I don't know. But, I mean, what an interesting interaction, because if you sort of forget that Alexa is a little device, this is the way that families work. You sort of come in and just like you're in hollering distance, that's the communication. And that hasn't really been the case for digital interaction before. We've had speech like this, but we haven't had it where we've lit up the room and sort of in just sort of like, again, this sort of common domestic environment. So again, it's coming back to this idea, Derek mentioned this, I love it, this minimum viable interaction. This is, again, that idea of short-circuiting intent to action. And what I think is interesting about Alexa is that this feels like the thing beyond the phone. I mean, we still got to, sort of sort out some of the tricky stuff there in terms of the recognition and what to do with the information, but you can see it starting to work. Ambient intelligence with this unified familiar AI, and it's not just limited to the living room anymore either. These new dot and tap models that Amazon is coming out with, designed to let you take Alexa anywhere. It's escaping the living room, maybe even to the backyard, to the Mount Everest or whatever's out there. So it's different from phone systems, which only do this from a few feet. Again, it sort of lights up the whole room with this artificial intelligence. So you've got one interface for over 300 services. I think maybe they're approaching 500 now. This single distributed artificial UI for the smart devices in your home. So now these skills, these services, these are basically apps. So this is an app store. It doesn't have kind of all of the goodness of the open web in that way. But it is a very easy way to experiment with search-based or speech-based interfaces. They've got this really sort of easy set of tutorials. The developer kit can get you up and running with a question and answer app or skill in an hour, so you can start asking Alexa some stuff. Lots of tutorials out there, and it's ready for you. So if you're interested in experimenting, what happens if you hook up your company or organization or university's services to a speech interface? It's really easy to experiment and prototype. It's that great thing that Rachel said about prototyping is a great way to learn a new technology. So these are the sort of 4 ways to think about it. These are the tools, the levers that are available to us, the things that we can start working with right now. I do want to sort of end, though, on a note of sort of asking, why do we make this stuff? And to whose benefit? Because I think that we're at a moment where we're just sort of starting this entirely new way, and there are big companies that are pushing the charge on this and want to, own it and define it, understandably. But what are the values that we bring to them, and why do we want to use them also as consumers of these things? Right now, I'm not sure a lot of our physical interfaces are adding much value. They chatter and they distract. So today, we've got 1 billion new voices rising in the network. Let's design them to speak when there's something useful to say. Reduce the chatter in favor of joy or insight, or at least real utility. How do we improve the data signal? What kind of remarkable insight might we offer, and not just toys? The toys are really important for us to make as we sort of get the hang of it. We need to play and splash in puddles. We don't need more toys as products. You know, it's like, let's play and experiment and then figure out what can we do to deliver meaningful value to people. So while collecting and reporting data is on its own a pretty neat trick, that shouldn't be the goal in and of itself. You know, when you dive into the data, try to come back with something even better. It's not about the data. It's about the genuine insight we can provide. Or, you know, put another way, this is, you know, I think something that Val, come back to again, I'm just going to post this picture as many times as I can of Val. You know, the title of her talk was Meaningful Web Animation. We're not doing this stuff just to jitter and distract. How do we bring actual meaning to this stuff? So a big part of what we can do now is to sort of ask ourselves, how are we moving that forward? The goal isn't just to make things talk. It's to improve the conversation, right? Connected does not mean smart. Smart does not mean good. We need to deliver on a human need. The real goal is not how smart each individual node can be, but hopefully how intelligent it can become while it's part of this collective network, the sort of value it can provide to, you know, the human beings. I want to mention some stuff that Aral is working on now. He's the guy who did the grabbing magic trick off the screen. That was sort of a fun sort of novelty project that he did to prototype, to learn this technology, but the stuff that he's really invested in right now is thinking about the ethics of design. You know, what's happening with the data that we're doing? What happens as we push these technologies, again, into the most intimate spaces of our lives? And so I encourage you to check out their ethical design manifesto there. It raises some interesting questions at the very least, because there's some creepy stuff happening right now. You know, all too often, we already see that embedding sensors in the world, sharing our identity, leads to this kind of surveillance capitalism. In digital form, that's those terrible ads that follow you around the web, right? So what happens when that kind of individual tracking gets into your house? You know, who's watching you and to what end? I think it's telling that when people talk about beacons, it's almost never about the physical web stuff that Scott is leading. It almost always leads to location-based marketing. You're going to be walking by the Starbucks, it's always a Starbucks, and they're going to hit you with a notification to let you know about that cheaper latte, which Starbucks only sells you more expensive lattes, I'm pretty sure. But that's the idea. It's like, yeah, more deals. You know what we should do is we should punch people in the face with deals as often as possible. I actually have a demo of what that looks like here. This idea of pinging people with coupons and deals as soon as they enter a store. Hey, there's a deal. And punch you in the face again with that. As if the only use of technology is to sell stuff. By the way, you guys, I've got this discount code for the book. You can't afford not to buy it. I don't know if I mentioned that. Really, get after that. But what if we thought about using beacons in a completely other way? What if we said to ourselves, you know what? Don't be a jerk, like Jamie was telling us just a moment ago. Well, here's an interesting project. Wayfinder is an experiment in the London Underground that uses that very same technology, those beacons that people want to use to punch you in the face with coupons, to help the blind and visually impaired find their way in the tube. So they've instrumented a station with these Bluetooth beacons that track the user's location and offers directions. So this young woman, she has the app on her phone. She's getting outfitted with the headset for a trial run in London's Pimlico station.
Welcome to Pimlico station. Follow the ramp down to the ticket hall. Turn left and walk down the stairs. There are 9 steps. Bear right and walk forwards to the ticket barrier. You are approaching the barrier. You are approaching the end of escalator. Walk forwards to the end of the hall. You are now at the platform.
That's the kind of world I want to live in. It's like really changing people's lives. Embed sensors in the world, not to sell them something. I mean, that's fine. But what if we can actually really give somebody independence, an agency? make them more of who they already are, to be everything that they can possibly be. This is still in experimental stages, but the feedback they've got from its testers is pretty inspiring. I was looking at some of their survey work. The people said, I felt empowered. I felt like any other commuter. My first steps to independence on the tube. You know, what kind of world do you want? Who are we building toward, and what benefits, and to what end? You know, there's something creepy, even sinister for sure, about the devices of big companies. And I've got one in my living room. I've got an Echo. Amazon's listening to my scintillating conversations, listening in on everything we do at home. The smart home network Wink came out with an ad that sort of plays on that notion of sort of who's listening, who's paying attention to you.
Honey, we need to talk about Robot Butler. Look, I love the way he controls the lights and unlocks the door when I forget my keys. It's just that I feel like he's always watching us.
Yes, that's why we should just use Wink. Look, it can monitor and manage our house, but it won't develop human emotions.
Hey, buddy.
I mean, all of us here like smart technology, but when it becomes too smart, when it goes a little too far, and again into the most intimate spaces of our home, you know, what's to be done about that? And what should we think about it as designers, not just as consumers? You know, at what point do you stop being in control? Or does the technology make decisions that you don't agree with, right? I mean, so, you know, it's like maybe it's making decisions you don't agree with, or maybe it's just trying to kill you, right? This is an actual headline. Try to eat her head. The human being should always have access to the off switch, right? My wife Liza, who also works on this stuff, is sort of fond of saying, my hand on the doorknob should override the smart lock. And we're not there yet. We're still in the Gerardo days, right? Our machines and our algorithms don't always do the right thing. They're not always as predictable or smart as we'd like. So I think our challenge as designers is to think about how do we want them to behave? How do we help them sometimes understand that they aren't smart enough to know what to do? How do we give them those good manners? But to do that, we have to understand what our own values and manners are, the world that we're trying to create. Because I share this prayer that we realize that there's more to our life than the bright young things optimizing to the algorithm in Silicon Valley. I mean, those goals of efficiency, of disruption, are kind of dubious to me. I mean, Brad reminded us, right? In this rush to disrupt, we forget about the things that are more important. I don't want my home to be disrupted. You know, I don't even want a smart home. I don't want home automation. Those are not goals to me. My goal is a home that is calm and in harmony and an oasis and a place to connect with family and friends. So if we can light things up to do that, then great. You know, perhaps by understanding this digital environment that these objects now live in, perhaps they can do that. But that should be the goal, not just to make everything talk. Again, it's about improving the conversation. So we should make technology bend to our lives, not the reverse. Make things more like they are, the objects, the spaces in our lives, more of what they are, our home, more of an oasis. Make us more human. Technology is neither good nor bad, but it is a multiplier. It's a multiplier of the values and the power that are brought to it. And so what shall we amplify? I think the goal, again, is not to embed technology into our lives, but to make us better humans and to make social connection and to empower the better parts of us. And friends, that is definitely a 4 1/4 star idea. So, you know, check the values of your creation. This is the last homework that I want you to do as you spend the next day here and go home and go back to your lives is, you know, what are we making? What am I doing? How come? Let's make this technology that bends to our lives, not the reverse. Let's make technology that amplifies our humanity and strengthens our social connection. Let's make technology that provides insight and joy, not just data or novelty for the sake of it. And let's make technology that empowers the individual and the disenfranchised, you know, instead of the corporate and the powerful. You guys, it's an amazing time to design the future. And you guys are doing it. The tools are right here. This isn't for somebody else to make. This is for you to do and for you to steer. We're going to be able to do this together. This is an exciting time. We're inventing this stuff, all of us. So go out there and make something amazing. Thank you. Thank you.